Welcome to the Staff in French Code. I'm Raymond Magdalene here as always with my co-host Pope Jupiter.
E.
And today we are the knob slobbiest, throat goatinest, happy readers of the Ember Blade, the first in the Darkwater Legacy by Chris Wooding. A breath of fresh air for the first time in maybe ever in the series where we both pretty much don't have anything bad to say about the book. I think there only might have been one other case where we felt this way.
Yeah, Deathmaker was the last time we would be this positive about a book.
Yeah, but this book follows maybe the worst book that we have done.
Yeah.
And so the juxtaposition was so striking that you will have to forgive us for being a little bit more glowing than we might have otherwise been. But this was my pick, and so you get the first crack at your impressions before we jump into our bullet list.
I really enjoyed this book. Once we kind of basically, I think that it's up to the Moria section, and this very much started out as a Lord of the Rings. What's the word? Analog, XP, whatever. Yeah, but once the characters started gelling, and once they started getting to the point where they started like actually reacting off of each other and sort of forming a unit, then it really got interesting. And yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I binged like the last half of it yesterday, and Raymond apparently finished it about 2 hours ago. So
yeah, it's a long book.
That is the one thing I would say is that I think it could have used some editing in some places, and maybe some more stuff in other areas. But overall, I definitely think it could have been shorter, and so would have been a stronger book. Yeah, overall, it was a very interesting world. There was a lot of different cultures hinted at, as well as just explicitly on the page. Yeah, and I think I also will read the second one. It looks interesting. But
yeah, this is one where I would read the second one just for pleasure outside of the show. And I would also be interested in reading his other work.
Mm-hmm.
The guy is, he was born in 1977, so he's 46, 45.
Yeah.
And has been putting stuff out. So what did we say? Or what did we see on the Wikipedia page? 99?
Yeah, so he's been putting stuff out for 25 years.
Yeah. And it shows.
Mm-hmm.
Without just literally repeating what you just said, I think that with maybe the exception of the Broken Earth, this was definitely the most technically advanced writer that we've encountered.
Yes. And
from a narrative perspective, it's hard to even say this without it being trite, because people will say like, "Oh, when I was reading this, I laughed." But the character of Grub is actually funny enough that I was like belly laughing on maybe 3 occasions,
and I was legitimately like worried, like heart pounding, like adrenaline flooding my system at a couple of points where I was listening to it, where I was like, holy shit, what's going to happen? Who I did not expect the people who died to die.
Nope. And the ending for me was a legitimate tearjerker.
Yeah.
I was pretty emotional this morning when I was reading the last like couple chapters. The way that he executes the send off for the bard, I thought was that was just really well written. And the way that he wove in her song, and I'm assuming that's going to reappear, going forward. And I mean, I'm a sucker for like the stoic knight protector.
Oh yeah.
With like it has to be protecting a female character that is not just a damsel. Yes. And in this case, she wasn't.
And I really appreciate that they made that a mostly platonic love match. There was some, romance.
There was a one line hint that like she couldn't bust a fuck.
Yeah.
There, and we don't get the reason for that.
No, I suspect it seems like the Sod are not entirely human.
Something was
Yeah,
going on
yeah.
there. And
Um,
maybe we'll get more info about that as we get more information about exactly why they're. I mean, I guess they were for me, a pretty close analog to gypsies,
yes, they were clearly a stand-in for gypsies.
which I don't know if that's even a term that you're supposed to use
Yeah, I think you're supposed to
anymore.
say Roma or something
Is
like
that what
that.
it is?
Yeah.
So,
Um,
our apologies if we've inadvertently been offensive, but like that is the analog that's being used.
and I do
Uh,
think that their whole situation is a massive unfired Chekhov's gun.
yeah.
I don't think Aaron has fulfilled his role as a Sod friend or whatever he was. I think there's still more to
No,
that.
because we never get a scene where the mark on his arm disappears, right?
Right. No, not that I. And they make such a big deal about it. I would think they would have. He would have mentioned that.
Right.
So
And I will say also, if you have gotten into the habit of listening to our podcast and then reading a book, don't do it this time.
no,
Leave
this
leave now. Go read the book if you haven't, because we're going to spoil all that is good. And there's some genuine surprises that are executed
yes.
in a way that is genuinely surprising.
Yeah, our last few episodes have sort of been that cinema sins style. This is a bad book, and we're just ripping it to shreds. You don't need to know the details to enjoy that. Read this book.
Well, in the last two episodes, unless I'm getting the order wrong, we had Everking and then Part-Time Monster Hunter.
Correct.
And both of those books, there were legitimate concerns that the author was doing more bad in the world
Especially
than
with Part
good.
Time Monster Hunter.
Yes. This, on the other hand, he does all the good things.
Yes.
People speaking truth to power, the use of art as a weapon.
I especially liked how the bard seemed to almost elevate her music to a magic art.
Yeah.
That the idea of using magic as a focus or using music as a focus for magic is something I've always enjoyed. I've always loved the idea of someone performs a musical piece and that's the magical ritual. That's kind of and there were kind of hints of that. Not that she was like this temptress or this manipulator or anything, but that there was power in her words, in her song, for sure.
Yeah, and she was legitimately virtuosic.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And she had her own backstory that was intriguing, and her connection with her people was none of that was diminished by the relationship with Herod,
Mm-mm.
even though he did take the role of the. I guess I would stipulate it as he was purely a martial protector.
Yes.
So no, she was not a fighter, but her contributions to the story were much more important than his
Mm-hmm.
were. If anything, he was the itemized of the two.
Right.
And so yeah, I thought that was really good. All in all, just a 10 out of 10. I would put this book up there with anything that I've read.
Mm-hmm.
I think easily this could be up there with your Patrick Rothfuss,
I think
your
the
Game of
fact
Thrones,
that
your
Brandon Sanderson is held up as this like pinnacle of authors in the fantasy genre, and this guy is just languishing as just a jobber or whatever is a fucking travesty.
Sanderson never came even a not even a tenth of the emotional weight
No,
of the stuff in this book. Not even
and
not
he
even
didn't
close.
approach a millionth of the comedy of Grub.
No, no. I mean, so we'll talk more about Grub. Let's turn to the bullet list here. So we'll start with the setting, and you had said just before we started that you were categorizing this as a grimdark setting, and I disagree with that. So
I think that so your argument is that this is a classic fantasy story of capital G good guys, capital B bad guys, black and white. Um, and while you did acknowledge that he does do some shades of gray, some nuance there, that is sort of the core of this story. Am I out
It,
of?
more or less, and it's got your. I mean, essentially, we've got this is a heist novel,
Sure. Yep.
and we get. I mean, it's an 800-page book, and so we get kind of two. The first about half or so is a travelogue,
Yeah.
and then essentially it's the equivalent of like the first two Lord of the Rings books
Mm-hmm.
smashed together. Because I think what the whole Lord of the Rings thing is like 1,200 pages or something like that.
That
Um,
sounds right. Yeah.
and so it's that kind of a scope, and you have your kind of standard cast, and the for me the setting was pretty stark high fantasy fare. You've got uh, your empires. There's even there's a Mirkwood analog.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
There's a Moria analog. Actually, it kind of implied there were a couple of Moria analogs
yeah,
as
well,
far as.
I want to talk about that a little bit in our next bullet point.
Okay, that's
Uh,
fine.
but yeah, for me, this seemed like well within the scope of. I don't even think I would really be willing to call this a dystopia. It
Really?
didn't seem dystopian to me.
So you've got the primary power in the world as far as our protagonists are concerned is an imperialist autocratic empire who wants to crush any cultures that are not their own, and their protagonists are literally the last vestiges of the resistance against this imperialist power. And we find out along the way that, and to be clear, we're going into full spoiler mode at this point. So if you haven't already read the book, stop listening, go read it, come back. We find out that Aaron's father essentially betrayed the revolution to the imperialist power, and that the that Keel also betrayed. And so these are not. So it's. I don't think there is a great deal of hope, and the character of Garrick is entirely someone who is trying to strike a blow rather than try to actually affect change.
I agree with you that Garrick is not a hopeful
Right.
character, but I think that we're getting like a zoomed in
Right.
view on one area of the world, but like the Ocean Empire is like they're still courting other powers. In fact, that's the whole reason for the wedding.
Right.
And so they haven't conquered the world.
But wasn't it made
But they
pretty?
have conquered Ocean.
I don't know. My impression of the Crodans was that they're sort of like the Fire Nation in Avatar. They haven't conquered the whole world yet.
Okay, but I mean that's fine. But I guess for me, the dystopia would be they had totally. I mean, I guess we have to kind of define terms. I would put the fifth season for me that is more of a dystopia.
Sure.
I had mentioned to you before Eric of Melniboné, Michael Moorcock's work, where there really isn't a whole lot of civilization left. Most of it has crumbled, and
Right.
you're in the aftermath. I feel like this is a pre-dystopian. The world is on the edge of becoming a dystopia, and the teaser throughout the novel of Vika,
Mm-hmm.
um, she got the whisper on the wind of, you know, Sauron is rising.
Right.
We don't get almost anything in terms of exactly what that's going to entail, except you imagine instead of there being these three dread knights, an army of them, and the
Right.
darkness washes the land, the demons rise from the deep, so
Mm-hmm.
on and so forth. We know that's coming, the dystopia is later. This is sort of I guess it's a world in decline in some sense, but also and maybe he meant it to be this way, but the Krogers, uh, the Crodens, their society doesn't seem dystopian. He makes sure to include, there's still culture there,
Mm-hmm.
and you've got the guys going home, and Clyson, I believe, was the guy's
Mm-hmm.
name. He goes home and he's playing with his kids, and his wife is there, and
And his wife wouldn't be out of place in the Hunger Games capital.
okay,
Like
because
she,
I would put the Hunger Games as a
oh
dystopia.
yeah. I mean, she's the definition of vapid socialite.
But
Unless I missed something with her
right, but
character.
again, in that story, the whole concept is that it's after the empire consolidates power, and then there's this long period of their control, and we are seeing people finally rising up from the ashes of their ancient, well, not ancient, but their uh, old history.
Seemingly settled
Yeah,
history. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
in this book, I got the idea this was much more of a this is our last chance to avert dystopia, not the world is already shit and there's no hope.
Now that I'm thinking about it, thinking about my position, I think it was just I empathized too much with the Ossians, and there's a definite strain of if we don't, if Aaron and company don't succeed, then the Ossian culture and way of life will be erased and replaced with a Croton.
Or at the very least, the what is the bards people called
The
again?
Sod, I
Uh,
think.
they're going to get erased.
Yes.
That much is
They are in the process of being
there's an
erased.
active genocide happening there, complete with ghettos and extermination.
Right.
And so there are definitely dystopian elements, but I guess I'm too hung up on the term grim dark.
Yeah.
I guess I would have imagined I would have imagined there to be more grit. I wouldn't call this a very gritty novel.
No. It's definitely not like polished and clean, but it's not a grimy novel. No. So.
And as I said to you before, the camera is kind of pretty closely zoomed in
Mm-hmm.
on our characters, and so I guess I was kind of imagining that even in these towns where the Oceans are there, they kind of have their outposts, but like the city just kind of exists. And he's not describing the peasantry as being like gaunt and thin and starving, or
No.
it seems like they're mostly a conquered people, but conquered in a they're not being genocided.
Right.
The Bards race, the
That's
Sards or whatever, they are definitely getting the bad end of things. But
yeah.
the Oceans are conquered, but if they play ball, they're mostly being allowed to continue their farming and their so on and so forth.
Right, which I think was basically a plot point because wasn't there another nation that resisted the Crotons to the bitter end, and they basically got the Sod treatment. It wasn't the Sods; it was another group. Um,
I'm blanking on that. I don't remember that specifically
because I think it was when
because there were the Erd, but that
yeah,
was like a I thought that was an analog to like they were the ancient Romans.
right. That was my impression too. But I'm pretty sure when Garrick is telling Aaron about his father's betrayal, he talks about how there was another nation that the Crotons had invaded and kind of implied there was a similar moment where they could either keep resisting or surrender, and they chose to keep resisting. And as a result, they were basically, I don't know if it was implied they were genocided, but it was implied they were all uh, completely subjugated.
Yeah, I'm with you that the Crodons are bad
Right.
and that they will go to dystopian ends to accomplish their goal. I just don't think the novel is, as I said, gritty enough and far enough along the timeline for it to be a dystopia. This to me, this very much seemed like a last chance. Like the
Okay.
story of the saga is reclaim the ancient artifact, save the world. Not the world has been destroyed. How do we rise from the ashes?
So I'd say it more has grimdark characteristics, but it's not necessarily
Sure,
grimdark.
sure.
Because I think there's definitely less hope, that less of the optimism than I usually expect from a typical fantasy story. Like,
I would say, because I mean, I've never heard the Lord of the Rings, for example. I've never really heard, certainly not in academic circles, I've never heard anybody call that a dark fantasy or a grim dark. And I think the Lord of the Rings is far grittier with far darker implications, and the world is way more fucked up.
mm,
There is no.
there's an active, at least one active genocide against people who, if they're not human, they seem like they're people. Like the Sod, whether the Sod are 100% genetically human, or there's something else going on, and that they're people. They're deserving of that kind of respect and whatnot, and there seems to be an active genocide of them. That isn't something that's present in Lord of the Rings.
No, no. From a culture clash
Like,
perspective, this is darker. But I'm saying in Tolkien's world, there really aren't any, aside from I guess really the hobbits. There aren't any flourishing civilizations. You've got Rohan is under thrall.
hmm,
Uh, Gondor is basically reduced to one city.
yeah,
The elves, I mean, whether it's the Mirkwood elves or blah blah blah, all of them are. I mean, they're about to bust a leave,
yeah,
and they're fading.
yeah.
Um,
The fact that society and civilization has contracted is a major theme of the Lord of the Rings. So
yeah.
yeah, you're absolutely correct there.
Whereas in this book, you kind of get the impression that there's a vibrant world. It's just that the Crodons have kind of they are the the pinnacle power,
Mm-hmm.
and they're doing bad stuff, and the world is on a trajectory for being shitty
Right.
very soon. But there's a chance to reverse that before it happens. Where again, I would say in the Lord of the Rings, yes, Sauron is rising and so on and so forth, but the world is already fucked
Yeah.
at that point. It's sort of the story of how humans can rise from
Mm-hmm.
the ashes and start their age of dominance.
Right.
Um, but I guess like that's as good a transition point as any into setting aside the grim dark thing. To what degree do you think this is a derivative story, and how did you feel about that as you were reading it? I've got a fair amount that I could say on that topic.
I remember I sent you a message like, I'm really enjoying Lord of the Rings from Merry and Pippin's perspective.
Yes,
Which,
I thought that was a good comment.
which definitely is what it felt like. I think up until they get to the Racken Bay,
Right.
I think that's where Aaron finally becomes to engage in a little bit of toxic masculinity. A man, because I don't know if it ever stated their ages. I felt like they were 12, and then I realized no, they're probably more like 17.
Yeah, it is. It does have that, which is not my favorite thing, where there has to be the coming of age
Yeah.
element to the story. I mean, this is true of Wheel of Time,
Mm-hmm.
so on and so forth, and it's my least favorite part of those stories, and it is present here,
Yeah.
and it's no less lame than it is in other stories. But
Right. I think once they got past the travelogue and into the heist section, I think that's where he really stretched his legs, and I think that's where a lot of the derivation petered off. But I do think that especially the first half is is pretty derivative of Tolkien, and uh I mean you have White there, T.H. White, Once and Future King, yeah.
well, yeah, because there's 100% the
King
who's
Arthur.
gonna, and I mean literally at the end the druid woman hands him the sword.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no, they don't literally pull it from a lake, but
No, but they do pull it from a stone.
well, and then Grub actually shoves it into some
Yeah.
stone, and yeah. Um, so I do think that there was a really, it's one of those things where we're never gonna know unless we get to talk to Chris Wooding.
Mm-hmm.
But if this was not him sitting down and saying like, yeah, I'm gonna take my shot at just leaning into the Tolkien reverence.
Mm-hmm.
If he did that on purpose, then this is one of the best I've ever read.
Yeah.
If it was accidental, that wouldn't be as impressive. Then it would kind of just be like, oh, you think
Yeah.
you think you invented this story.
Right.
But I mean, I think in general the best works of art are, I mean, often they're the same stories,
Yeah.
and the thing that matters is the little pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that I think the whole way through it was pretty derivative. Um, I mean, you've got everything from the ring wraiths to Gandalf.
Mm-hmm.
He even does the thing where she does Vika does use a little bit of magic, but it's not until she gets struck by
Mm-hmm.
uh, the Death Knights,
Right.
and then returns and is more powerful, and then
Yeah.
she can. And I mean, she literally does the "You shall not pass" in
Yeah.
Scavengard,
God,
and
Scavengard is one place that definitely needed some cuts. IMO.
yeah, I don't think that was the strongest, and it wasn't a mine.
No, it
Uh,
was a
it was a floating kind of
island castle.
island intermountain
Yeah.
thing uh, that was pretty steeped in magic and tried to prevent you from leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it had the Balrog, which they don't name it,
No, it's just the beast.
the beast, and it's got a Medusa quality, but or what's the monster with all the tentacles, and it's like the
Oh,
god of
Cthulhu.
Cthulhu. It's kind of got that going on where to look on it
Mm-hmm.
is to be insane.
Yeah.
And again, I thought all of that was pretty well executed. I think Vika as the Gandalf analog was fairly good, although my complaint is the same as it is in Lord of the Rings. Like the magic that she actually does just isn't cool.
It's a lot of what in Mage of the Ascension we called coincidental magic. Does she actually do magic, or does she just know the right herbs?
Yeah, or otherwise it's just flashlight.
Right. Or it was interesting because there definitely seemed to be some stuff that was like the binary melting agent she used. I was like, that's just white phosphorus, isn't it? And so that was kind of what I the magic for the druids seemed to be mostly just herb lore.
Right, and alchemy.
Yeah. So it's not clear how much of it was just, hey man, take this and you'll see God. Um,
Of which there was a fair amount.
right. So
And she did more than Gandalf, because of course Tolkien was, you can like or dislike what the magic that Gandalf uses, but he is very uh, surgical
mhm,
with the way that he does it. Whereas Vika, she just kind of has a grab bag of flasks that
yeah,
we never know anything about what they can do, and so there's always one.
she's the buff bot.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, she kills one of the ring
Yeah.
wraiths with a fire potion
Mm-hmm.
that we didn't know that she had. Probably would have been useful several times earlier in the book.
Wasn't it the same stuff she used to melt that one lock?
I don't think so.
Oh,
But I mean, she does, strength potions, and
yeah,
sometimes she'll just juice herself up, and that gives her,
yeah.
the witch vision.
Mm-hmm. And especially since she talks about how the blood of elder druids and druidesses uh, can create elixirs so potent that they make the normal stuff look like whatever.
And I think we're gonna get in the second book the elder druid that she meets. I
Mm-hmm.
think we're gonna get a Gandalf Saruman
Yeah.
thing. I think she's gonna be a baddie.
Yeah.
I think that's gonna happen. If it doesn't, shame on you,
Right.
Chris Wooding. Because I mean, you've gone this far. Because none of this for me it doesn't indict the book. Like I don't have any issue at all with a retelling of a Tolkien-esque story because he did it so well.
Let's be honest. How many classic films and video games, whatever, are basically just Robin Hood?
Oh yeah, yeah, and I don't have any issue with
No.
that at all. Done poorly, um, I do think the bar is high, and so I would say probably 75% of the time or better if you're an author and you're thinking I want to write my version of the Tolkien story. If you're not certain that it's an absolute banger, you probably have a better story in the chamber that is different.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, he's an established writer. He's got lots of books out, and I felt like this was a deserved and mature retelling of some of that story with its own flair.
Mm-hmm.
He chose to go much more into the cultural side of things than I think Tolkien did. Tolkien was much more interested in the legendarium and the world building, and there's not as much of that here.
Right.
And but I think ultimately it's a strength of the book, not a weakness that he has those elements there because he does dash your expectations at several points in the
Mm-hmm.
story where I thought, okay, well, it's going to go this way, and then it didn't, and then there was the Aaron, was that the
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he betrays Garrick, but then doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought that was the end of it, but then he blindsides you with Keel,
Yeah.
ultimately being the one who goes through with the betrayal.
And a betrayal that he didn't foresee because the whole point of that scene was like, no, I know you made a deal. Like you aren't as slick as you thought you were.
Right. How did you like the Dread Knights? What was your feeling about them?
They kind of felt a little out of place, to be honest. And I think that's largely because this felt like a pretty low magic world, and then you've got these knights who can make you think that your body is rotting just by looking at you. I don't know. It just seemed a little.
They were a weird combination of like Ring Wraith and Four Horsemen of the
Yeah,
Apocalypse kind of thing.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, because the magic, and for once we didn't put magic system on here on our list, but I think that's because there really isn't a magic system. There's the druid herb lore and alchemy and communion with the aspects.
Yeah, but otherwise it's a very soft magic system.
Yeah,
About as far, again, with Tolkien being really the only one I can think of where it's more soft.
for a good chunk of the book, I thought this was a magicless fantasy.
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah,
I,
and
I did think for a while that the druids were just straight up alchemists. Like
yeah,
they just knew more about the natural world
mm-hmm,
and they had their secret language.
right,
I thought that was it. But then, we get to Scavengard
mm-hmm,
and we do see a little bit of sorcery there.
yeah,
And there were the shadow monsters where
mm-hmm.
they had to fight them with their
That was
shadows.
clever. I like
It
that.
was clever. I would have liked to have seen more with that, I think. I
I
wonder if we're
think
going to
she
return
hinted,
there.
yeah, there was because um,
Are they going to be the ghost army? Are they the ghost army that Aragorn has to get?
well, I think the sorcerer is implied to be the ancient evil that they're working on. Not necessarily the sorcerer that they encountered in Skavengard, whatever. But someone like that because there's a scene where Vika says worse is coming or something, and you've already encountered it, and Aaron thinks back to the shadows.
Yes.
So I do think that was a plant for a future for the future story. And they seem, maybe it was just because they were kind of too powerful. I mean, not in an OP sense, but they were stronger than our heroes could handle.
Yeah, well, and for the first book in a, I don't know if it's a 2 book thing or if there's another one that's going to be forthcoming because the second book I think only came out in 23.
Yeah, so
So
it's a 4 year gap.
So maybe there's another book that'll come
Mhm.
out later. I don't know. Power levels can make it make sense that there has to be some evil
Yeah,
that outstrips them.
and I generally, even as I was saying, I was like, wait, what? I don't care if they introduce someone who's too powerful in the early stages. That just gives you something to look forward to them beating.
Right, because
That's
I'm guessing we're gonna get the, Eye of the Tiger transitional phase in the next
mhm,
book where he goes from he has his training from when he was a kid, but he's not a swordsman to oh my god, look how good he's gotten.
right.
Now he can wield the Ember blade.
Yeah,
And then maybe he will be able to fight uh, some of the Dread Knights. And I imagine that will about when he gets to that stage will be when Chris Wooding introduces an army of them
hmm
or some the
something more powerful.
yeah.
Yeah,
But I did think that the the Dread Knights were as close to cheese as the book gets,
yeah,
but I'm not gonna. It didn't go over the edge. I liked Ruin, the giant hammer wielding.
yes.
That was kind of cool. I think if anything for me, the thing I did not like about them was that they were just kind of dumb, mute, one
Yeah,
dimensional kind of servants of the emperor.
I think that was my one of my major issues. Now that you mention it like that, because yeah, if I think of video game antagonists who are like part of an order, but they have like one evocative name like that, like sorrow or whatever. Usually they typify that also in their dialogue,
Right.
and these guys were just dumb brutes. They didn't have any dialogue, any characterization. They were just beings there to cause destruction on behalf of the Croden Empire.
It's hinted at that there's a some kind of a bargain that's been made
Yeah,
for them to control these Dread Knights. I wonder if there's going to be an Empire sorcerer who is the one that's kind of like the go-between.
could be.
If we're going to find, I'm guessing that in the second book, we're going to get a point of view from the Empire perspective more than just a couple chapters here and there from like a middle management army
Right.
guy. We're going to get scenes in the palace and so
Yeah.
on. I would guess. So I guess from there, let's hard turn to gender.
I really dug the gender politics of this book because he had a misogynistic empire and was like, "That's fucked up and stupid." Mara's whole speech to the guy wanting her to take in his gifted kid, a little a little preachy, but kind of with a point.
Yeah,
You know,
it was a little on the nose.
yeah. But I really enjoyed the way she pointed out how her society suffers for.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say if you're listening to our podcast at this late stage and
Yeah,
you've got like a t-shirt on that's got that goofy American flag with a blue line or something on it, you're not gonna like this one.
no,
Too woke.
yeah.
It's gonna be too woke for you.
There aren't any transes in it, but that we know of.
Hey, they could be coming in the second one. Trans
Absolutely,
rights.
absolutely. Yeah, and it seemed like the Aussians were much more gender equal.
Yes, that was the implication. And then
Yeah,
the Crodens came in and said, haha, now women can't work. And,
yeah,
have to. I think the line he used was they're only good for baking cakes and raising kids.
yeah.
And, and yeah, you've got Mara that is a genius inventor.
Mm-hmm.
And her whole story with having to allow a man to take credit for her inventions
Mm-hmm.
and then give her the cash, which she then uses to assist in the secret uprising.
Right.
Dope.
Absolutely.
And then there is Orica, who is essentially a bard that takes the opportunity that's given to her to speak truth to power
Mm-hmm.
and sing the song of revolution directly at the prince
Yes.
of the patriarchal government. Uh,
So good.
and the song is well written, and yeah, I couldn't have enjoyed that part more than I did. The and then there's even Fen is an interesting character
Mm-hmm.
who is not a damsel,
No.
and the way that he wove in her personal background does create a certain degree of vulnerability
Yeah.
and trust issues that she has, but they are not a function of her prowess or a detractor from the intrigue of her character or her
Right.
ability to influence events. And aside from Garrick and maybe the Knight Herod, she's the most formidable of the group. I mean,
Yeah.
she's the Legolas,
Right.
Legolas. Yeah,
But
got him.
yeah, I agree. She is a competent archer, woodswoman. I mean, she's the ranger. She's and it is made.
She's the only one in the group aside from Garrick that could just say, "Nope, I'm out," and just walk into the forest. And we're pretty sure she could just reappear at any time because you're not thinking like, "Oh, she's gonna die."
Right.
If our main two characters, Cade and or Aaron, were just let loose somewhere, they would have to find a city or whatever, and then the rest of our cast is kind of
Yeah, I think they'd be a little bit more better off. Well, Aaron maybe, because they do kind of spend the first couple of chapters like tracking a wild pig, which is not something you do lightly. But
all right,
uh,
fair enough. So
but
that
then there's the sequence where Fenn takes Aaron hunting, and he's like, "I've never done this before."
yeah, and then she's like, "You want to take the shot?" And he's like, "No, it's too far." And she's like, "Pussy," and
Yeah,
then just like kills the deer,
yeah.
and then makes him carry it.
I actually had to listen to that because I thought that Wooding had her hit the deer and then it just dropped there, which doesn't happen with bows.
No,
If you shoot a deer with a bow, even if it's a kill shot, it's gonna run. That will happen.
right? Yeah, no. There's a whole. She goes and does the.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not a big fan of like the valorizing of hunting
No.
in general. In a fantasy world, pre-industrial, it's going to happen. So I don't really count it against the book. I could have done without it, but and I don't know if it was really a necessary character building exercise, but in the context of Fenn as a character, it did serve the purpose of illustrating her competence.
It
And
did. Yes.
and
It also kind of just opened the door to the Fenn, Cade, Aaron triangle that.
and the female characters generally they have their own goals
Yes.
that don't necessarily aside from the Ember Blade, it does kind of seem like that's gonna just be like in the hands of a white man. But but all right, Chris, 9 out of 10. Then I guess -1 for
It.
that. But
I will say it is a traditional fantasy story in that respect, where the guys are the leaders and warriors, and the women are can also be warriors, but no, they wouldn't be the leaders.
I mean, Mara has her own agenda. I mean, they all obviously want the same thing, which is to get rid of the Crodons.
Mm-hmm.
But she has her ideas about education
Yes.
and a very clear like when the story's over, she doesn't just disappear
No.
and then it's just like in the Lord of the Rings where after the story's over it's basically then it's just about Aragorn is king, so on and so forth. The female characters just kind
Arwen
of
functionally disappears.
they just kind of disappear. I mean, with the chicks, it's they literally disappear.
Yeah.
Uh, and Fen is the closest that we get, as I said, to just kind of a damsel, but he does a really good job of juxtaposing her vulnerabilities and her need to be saved
Mm-hmm.
with a high degree of competence and an interesting backstory.
Yeah.
And I liked the concept of her dad loses her mom and then becomes emotionally unstable and abusive
Mm-hmm.
in it's not a way that I would have thought of.
Right.
He just takes her out into the woods and leaves her there, or the where he they're climbing, and so he just lets her go, and that's what creates
Your fear of
her
heights.
fear of heights. Was that at the edge of believability for the cruelty of a parent to a child? Yes, it was at the edge, but
Didn't she say she broke both legs? That
She-
was actually the part that was the least believable for me, that she got that much.
she broke both legs, and then he asked her, "Well, what did you do then?" And she said, "I crawled home."
Yeah, I don't feel like someone with this level of technology and medicine, I don't think they would be able to do the kind of acrobatics. She doesn't do a lot of acrobatics, but she's clearly someone who has 100% use of her legs. And I don't know if that,
Right. So again, like
but
at the edge.
but yes, I think it was very believable. And
This is the first book I think that we've done for the whole podcast where my ability to suspend my disbelief was not an issue.
right,
It was fine. Were there
yeah,
a couple points where I was like, yes, but who cares?
yeah,
Um, kind of irrelevant. So I loved the female characters. I thought they were great, and all the male characters too were generally pretty interesting.
yeah. I did like the sort of juxtaposition between the highborn Aaron, who was an Ossian, but basically doing everything he can to be a Croden in order to curry favor with them. And then you've got Cade, who's the lowborn Ossian, and is very much of the fuck these Crodens. They are terrible, and we need to get rid of them.
Right.
And that whole thing, I thought was really clever and really well done.
Does it fuck?
I don't think so.
No?
The romance. Oh, okay. Can I rant about the Fen Triangle now?
We soon.
Okay.
We get one titty grab.
Yeah.
There's one titty grab.
Yeah. That was part of it, was that the relationship between, was it Sora, was that her name, and Aaron in the beginning?
Yes. Because obviously she will reappear in book 2 at some juncture.
Sure. And like the way they were like, oh, I hope she, you heavily implying sex, hoping they get to do that.
Right.
And it's like, but these kids seem like they're 12. And then it kept reading. I was like, oh, okay, no, they're more like 16, 17, 18, that cusp of adulthood type shit. But I thought it was fine. And then the whole, but the way they made it, kind of, you had no way of knowing whether her sneaking out to meet him was the reason his dad died until so deep into the book. I thought that was actually kind of good.
Yeah.
And I thought that, especially to contrast with Kaladin's would-be
Oh, we're
lover,
talking about
Way of Kings.
Brandon Bridgerson.
Yeah. The girl that Kaladin was sweet on and was friends with, and then she just kind of dropped him. Like, I think the way, and obviously we haven't seen Sora post disgrace, I guess you could
Right.
say. So maybe she'll go the same way, but my impression of it was that she was a much more human character, a reasonable person. The little bit we interacted with her,
Right.
naive, sure, young and in love, sure, but I didn't get the feelings from her and that situation like I got from Kaladin's situation, which is where she's just a hypergamous bitch looking for the person who will the most high value male.
Hypergamous.
Yes, hypergamous.
I think that obviously if we're talking like, are there good sex scenes?
No.
No. But I think he does a really good job of doing actual romantic love in a way that for me was very convincing, but particularly Orica and
Yes, absolutely.
um,
Uh,
I would go so far as to use words like breathtaking or moving.
yes, the
Um,
the Orica Herod relationship was very, very good, and I actually kind of dug and understood the heel romance situation.
I mean, Keel and his wife.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call that a romance.
no, but I liked that relationship. I liked that, I guess, plot line, subplot, however you want to.
She struck me as the only poorly done female character in uh, the story because I think he was trying to sort of set her as a normie against
Mm-hmm.
the fellowship, as it were.
Right.
But the result was that she came off to me as being kind of comically naive.
I definitely got a little bit of that kind of revolutionary elitism, especially when Keel describes his brother wanting to punch him in his bovine face, and how I don't remember the exact passage now, but it's when he first gets back into town and Keel is walking towards his brother's farm and talking to his brother, and he talks about how his brother never really considered anything beyond this town, or that kind of grew up in a small town and feel like you outgrew it type feeling. There was a little bit of elitism with the way he talked about, especially his brother, I thought, but that definitely felt more in character than like something Wooding was doing.
Yeah, but I mean, ultimately, it was one of those instances where they just didn't have a believable conversation, Keel
No.
and his wife, because she would have still been mad, but I mean, he couldn't have just, all right, I'm gonna stay home, and just like hung out, like they all would have died,
Right.
for sure, and they probably are all going to anyway,
Yeah.
but it just wasn't. There was a 0% chance. There wasn't any real option. He was not actually making a choice between am I going to leave again or am I just going to stay with my wife.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't an option, even as constructed by the narrative. And the idea that she just behaved as though it totally was,
Yeah.
for me, was it made her seem too simple
Mm-hmm.
and as I said, naive. And I guess here's as good a time as any to mention. I thought the dialogue was really good.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, some of the best that we've encountered. I don't think there were no like set the book aside for a second cheesy lines.
No.
I don't even think there were any like eyebrow raisers. Like it was
Yeah.
pretty solid all the way through.
This book did kind of add some meat to something I've been percolating on, which is a whole ass video essay about swearing in fantasy literature, which is something we've talked about
I was gonna
numerous
say,
times.
get off my jock, bro.
Yeah, yeah. But the way that this book uses, and I understand the author is British, so they use British swears. But feel like that's kind of accepted in fantasy. Like you can get, no one will blink at someone saying this bloody elf. But there are people who say you should never say this fucking elf.
But those people are both dumb and wrong, and they can be discarded
Right.
because that's just stupid.
Yeah.
This book does lean closer to the "thou art mine enemy"
Yeah.
style of quasi Elizabethan
Mm-hmm.
prose, but it's done well, and there's enough modern norms in the way
Right.
that the dialogue is constructed that it doesn't get cheesy.
Yeah. And I will say that the way that they invoke in 2024 we would say God or Christ or whatever, they say nine
Right, because what there were nine.
aspects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he uses this convention, ma and da,
Uh-huh.
for mom and dad, that I had not really encountered before, but it's been in like 3 or 4 of the books that we've done.
It's a Britishism.
It's British, okay.
Yeah.
I was starting to think it was a urban fantasy specific
No,
thing, but no, that must just be a British deal.
yeah, and actually, I think most of the urban fantasy authors we've read for this project, have been educated in the Commonwealth to some degree, either
Yes.
Canadian or
Yeah, lots of
English or South
Canadians and
African.
English. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be as popular of a genre to write in for Americans.
Right.
So, it doesn't fuck, but he does very nice, sophisticated,
Yes.
romantic love, and I felt rewarded enough. And then now, you may have a screed on the Venn triangle.
So Aaron and Cade fell in love with the first chick they saw after a harrowing experience, and they think it's true love. And it's made worse by the fact that Fen seems to be reciprocating their feelings. Right? I mean, that's kind of what it is that.
Well, let's be a little bit more pointed because it's not that they fall in love with the first girl. Uh, as far as I can tell, they fall in love with every girl
Yes.
that is mentioned in the entire narrative.
Any girl they exchange more than 3 words with and is at least somewhat close in age to them, they're like, can I? You interested?
Hey, baby, you want some fun?
Hey, baby, you want some fuck?
Uh, so yeah, that sucks.
Yeah.
But is it? It it's kind of a thing.
It so I will say that it definitely is something, especially with Cade's death towards the end, where that seemed to bring Fen and Aaron closer together. That's reasonable.
Yeah, because
Like,
then she doesn't have to pick.
true.
And she even says there's this line that I thought was really savage, and I don't know if he intended it to be so. I'm gonna be real. Most of the quotations that I have are just grub. It's just grub. So just after Cade dies, we're from the perspective of Fen. She says Cade had let go, but Aaron never would, no matter what. When she's thinking about will he catch her,
Uh
and
huh.
and it's like, well, what do you mean? Like he didn't he let go because he was dead. Like there
Yeah.
was no. It wasn't like he. It was just weird that to sort of. I think probably this is just a rare miss from Chris Wooding here,
Yeah.
but the if we take it at face value, what she's saying is that he abandoned her
Mm-hmm.
in some way, and that is analogous to what her father did when he, of no fault of his own, sacrificed himself to save his best friend from
Right.
going out onto this plank that he
Mm-hmm.
was desperately hanging on to so that they wouldn't both die.
Right.
And that's fucking savage. Uh, she's like, or read another way, she's like, well, now I know which one of these two is a real man. Because
Yeah.
Cade wasn't strong enough to pull himself back up, but I
Right.
know that Aaron will because he is the Dawnbringer, the wielder of the fun sword.
And I definitely got a bit of John and Samwell from Game of Thrones with Aaron and Cade. Like you've got the buff, skilled guy, and then you've got the kind of chubby comic relief character.
Joker.
Yeah.
Of course, Cade doesn't utter a funny word in the entire novel.
No,
So
most
it's one of those things where he just describes himself as funny,
yeah,
but he never actually is.
and he's implied to be entertaining because he can do impressions.
Okay, yes, he does impressions.
Yeah. Um,
And that does prove useful in their escape from
I
the
did
camp.
appreciate the Chekhov's the call back there when
Yes.
his ability to.
So there is this moment where Cade and Aaron have a heart to heart, and essentially one of them says to the other, you know, I shouldn't have been mad. May the best man win. Fenn's heart.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one is like, she's not a thing to be won. But then they just go like, yeah, okay, but also bros before hoes.
Right.
And that is it's not, that part's not good. That's not the best written part
No.
because it's not really convincing. And of course, they don't mean it.
Right.
There's every indication that if Cade hadn't died, that there's gonna be drama one way or the other.
Right.
One of the two of them is gonna be jealous, probably Cade.
Killing the third wheel is a common trope, unfortunately.
Yes, and that is exactly what occurs.
Right.
Is he just eliminates the third wheel. And there's a part earlier where Cade just like he pulls Aaron aside and he's just like, "Have you fucked her?"
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it's really random. And thankfully, Chris Wooding writes this part well because Aaron reacts by being like, "What the fuck? What do you mean? You mean have we done it?" Uh, but then he's just like, "Yeah, I'm in love with her."
Yeah.
uh, Kate is already in love with her, and he does kind of in the scene we just mentioned come back and he's like, I do this all the time. So they're kind of aware that they're aware of their emotional stultification
Mm-hmm.
in a way that in a lesser writer would not have included.
Right.
It is not a character trait that is valorized.
Right.
It is definitely a weakness in their characters that the author is clearly trying to tell us, like, dear reader, don't be a doucher
Right.
like these two.
I think it would have been stronger if he hadn't killed the third wheel, but you got to make room for your canon ship.
I don't remember if I said this earlier in the recording just now or when we were in the car earlier, but Kate's not dead.
You said it in
I
the car. You haven't said on
I
the.
feel like there's a 90% or better chance that Cade reappears. He might even be disfigured or have some other issue as a result of what happens in the fall or what happens in between. I could totally
Right.
see him reappearing and they're all this happy group trying to do their revolution and he's all scarred up and whatever. He's like, "Do you know what I've been through?" Blah blah
Right.
blah, and you just took her. But I could totally see that.
Or like a PETA to call back to Hunger Games again.
I don't know the names and
He was the one who was kidnapped by the Capitol and basically brainwashed to be an assassin, basically to hate
yes. Yeah,
Catman.
I could totally see that. And we also don't know that what was the bad guy who killed his dad? Hart?
Heart, yeah.
We don't know that Hart is dead either. It's implied,
Yeah.
but we don't know. He wounds him in the leg and then it collapses. So again, I think Hart could reappear, Cade could reappear, and they kill one of the Dread Knights.
Mm-hmm.
The
No, they kill two of them, don't
Well,
they?
the swordsman, she throws the fire at him, and we get the description. He burns to a husk.
Right.
He's dead. The other one falls.
Wasn't he right there in ground zero for the explosion?
Oh, well, but again, will that kill him? Because just before the explosion, he talks about how his armor is a masterwork of witch steel.
Right.
And
Yeah, that's definitely something where if Wooding wanted him dead, then he was dead. But if he wanted him alive, there's definitely wiggle room.
absolutely, and he could come back in the next one and like his armor's fucked up
Mm-hmm.
and whatever, and maybe they'll give him an additional weapon or
Yeah.
some other thing, and he wants revenge.
Right.
But then the third one, he fights Herod,
Mm-hmm.
and then Herod cuts him down with the Ember blade.
Yeah.
But we don't really get a definitive
No.
answer.
And I read the sort of description of the second book, and there's a lot of emphasis in the second book about being able to defeat a Dread Knight. So I think that even if the three we were introduced to in this book are dead, which there's really only one who's definitely dead, clearly they're going to come back, and that was the implication, was that these are not the only three.
Right.
So yeah, I definitely think we're going to be looking at more Dread Knights. Whether we get a whole army of them, like you've implied, could happen. I don't know, but I definitely think they're coming back.
All right, so we've got this Tech versus Magic, Krogan versus Ossia dynamic that I know you wanted to.
Well, I just think it's interesting how And really, what caused this was the description of the Krogan. Now you've got me doing it.
Kroger. Kroger Foods.
Well, no, Krogan puts me in mind of the Mass Effect race, which are a bunch of
Oh, because it's Croden,
yeah,
right?
it's
Yeah,
Kroden.
with a
It's
D.
but the Kroden cure for what to me seemed pretty clearly asthma for Tad Keel's son.
The grip.
Yeah, the grip. Which I mean, that's how I would imagine someone would describe asthma because it feels like your lungs are being squeezed in a vice or in a grip.
Yeah, I thought asthma, tuberculosis.
Yeah. But the Croden cure is to have him wear a special mask that will allow him to inhale a certain medicinal vapor. And
Vicks Vapor Rub.
well, to anyone who's had asthma, that's the treatment for asthma. Is you wear a nebulizer and it puts stuff into your lungs. I had to do that when I was a kid. But the Ossian remedy for that same issue is like a potion that staves it off at best.
Well, no, that's the druid.
Right. But the druids are kind of it's interesting because the description of the nine aspect religion is very much a decentralized one. Where the druids are the closest thing to like a priest or a religious order as far as worship of the nine goes, and they're very decentralized, very individualistic.
Yes.
So my interpretation is that the druids would that the druid solution and the Ossian solution are generally going to be more or less the same, and that could just be a result of the druid we met because we only met one druid really, who was Ossian. I mean, we did meet another druid, right?
Yeah, we met somebody like Nala or Nyla
Yeah.
or something, sees in the dark or something like
Yeah.
that. And then there's mention of a different one that is a proper noun and then parts the flame.
Right.
And that's the one that leads the druid signs in Skavengard, whatever.
Yeah. So it kind of put me in mind of like, well, okay, from our perspective, we know that, you know, the way to treat asthma is with a nebulizer with the right medicine inhaled through the nose. But we don't live in a world where you can take a potion and be strong for 9 hours. But I thought, well, actually, yeah, we do. It's called meth. I mean, is the potion she's giving them just liquid meth?
Yeah, because she even tells them like, tiny sip or you're gonna OD.
Yeah, and that's what I think is interesting is that it's clear that the herb lore, the alchemy of the druids are is potent, is effective. But I don't think, and I just keep going back to that bit at the end where Vika basically has a potion and she's like mix a few drops of this with water and boil it and have him inhale the steam, and it's like that's a basic nebulizer. Did she figure out what herbs or whatever the Crodens were using and basically recreate their cure and tell her how to do it?
Or it's just known, but the difference is that the Crodens have the apparatus.
Right. Which would make sense because they said explicitly that a druid can brew an elixir that will essentially keep the symptoms at bay, but he has to drink it once a month. Whereas if like the Crodens had figured out how to take that same elixir, a similar elixir, and vaporize it and have it absorbed through the nose to the breathed in like that, that makes it more potent. I mean, that just kind of lends strength to my thought, which is strength. Science and magic should not be at odds; they should work together. And I did enjoy that all said, I did enjoy the way they kind of juxtaposed it in the story. Although my natural anarchistic tendencies kind of made me rebel against the nationalism of the story.
Yes, there's very much the for the empire,
Yeah,
for the emperor.
Yeah, and I thought it was kind of interesting, not super interesting because our opinions on nationalism are much less common than most people. most people view nationalism as something that can be used well. And even I will say there are valid uses of nationalism. And one of them generally is to resist an imperialist foe. I didn't really think the juxtaposition of the Ossian nationalism versus the Croatan nationalism was enough to really make me hate the Crotans for their nationalism. You know, it was just kind of the general Croatan being shitty.
Well, and you almost get the impression that the real problem with the Crotons is the imperial order,
Right.
not the individual. So like American nationalism is a worse problem than
Right.
it's a different breed of nationalism that in our case it has seeped into the you know the very blood of the individuals, and they're not doing it because if they don't, somebody's going to show up and jail them.
Right.
Uh, it's organic in that sense. Whereas here, the implication is very much you say for the emperor all the time, and you make
Mm-hmm.
sure everybody knows that you are in line, because if you don't, you might just end up dead.
Right.
It's never explicit what happens to an actual Croton,
Mm-hmm.
if just for the crime of not being patriotic enough, but it's implied that much of your standing is tied to the impression that you are a good servant of the empire.
Yeah, and there was definitely a lot of stuff about being we're worried about people turning someone in for seditious words or what have you. A lot of that kind of thought police style rhetoric,
Well,
and even with stuff that wasn't like, man, fuck the Crotons, we should kill their empire. It was just like, maybe the Crotons aren't all they're cracked up to be. Hey, you better watch that seditious talk.
right, where the SS will show up.
Right.
Um,
The Iron Guard.
yes, and so
Which actually didn't they have like a cross symbol, like just to really nail the Gestapo?
yeah, no, I mean that is definitely
Yeah.
the analog that's going on. And again, I think if anything, that would be another point towards what I was saying at the beginning of the show, where I think there is a possibility that in the second book, these the Crotons could go full Nazi,
Right.
full genocide, execution camps. You're a 1-to-1,
Yeah.
but we're not there yet. And I assume that the narrative of the second book will be our heroes trying to avoid the slide into that
Mm-hmm.
Dystopia. So my next question is: you had mentioned to me in a text that you got to about chapter 70 and there was a wrinkle, and what you meant was Aaron's betrayal,
Right.
and then he chooses not to. But I thought that what you meant was the wrinkle that Garrick was talking to his pirate homie and was just like, yeah, I got to blow up the kids and the families and the women and just do a full suicide bombing terrorism.
I didn't think that was going to happen. I saw that part and I was like, oh well, that's not going to happen. I was absolutely shocked when it did.
And it did.
It absolutely did.
It absolutely did. And basically everybody's just like, yeah, war is hell.
Yeah.
Sucks that we had to go that route, but also fuck the Crotons.
They were the sons and daughters of capital. They would with Juven treatments. They would have been young for centuries.
Yeah. So there is that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we're all fans of propaganda of the deed and that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know that I necessarily agree with his actions there, given the amount of innocents who would have been killed. But
Were there innocents?
that's the question.
He said with a slightly cracking voice.
I mean, that is a legitimate question because it's hard to say, you know, there was certainly a number of Croatan nobility there, but theoretically, any Ossian nobility who were there would have been collaborators. And while we can't say that the Crotons have quite gone full Nazi yet, they're certainly further along than any other society we've met on that path.
And there was also more than once they mentioned there would have just been nobility and people of interest from all the powers
Right.
of the world that we haven't been exposed to yet.
Right.
And
So there would
so,
have been a number. There were probably nobles from nation states that were not imperialist, expansionist,
but all of them
but all of them were
bourgeoisie.
noble. Yeah. So,
So I mean, he blew up
but
the bouge.
servants, any performers who were in the room?
They were dicks. As soon as she played that song, the other member of the band was just
Yeah,
he
yeah,
just started slurring at her.
yeah. That was the band leader. The other performers were kind of like
Right,
whatever.
but
At worst, they were like, "Gonna get us killed." What
but
the
again,
fuck?
if you could have blown up a meeting with Hitler, Stalin, and all the other baddies, and then just a shitload of general bougies, but the cost was that like maybe some, because there's no children on screen.
Right.
It's just kind of an implication, and then yes, like there might have been some servant
The implication was
casualties.
that the entire like castle got
Right,
incinerated.
kaboom.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of have an issue with sacrificing innocent lives, but I also, yeah, I guess it's also the part of it is like chopping off those heads isn't gonna fix anything. Like it feels good. It feels tremendous. I mean, there's a whole bunch of catharsis with Aaron and Garrick both getting their revenge on certain people, and I don't think it's I don't think it will have led to a good outcome because I don't know. I agree it was a good thing to do, but I don't know that it was the best idea.
Well, and he sort of leaves it nebulous. He doesn't really cast it
Yeah,
as an act of evil.
especially since the whole thing is the bard, she knows about the plan, but specific or is it no, it's
Mara.
Mara. She knows about the plan and doesn't tell them because she thinks that they would try to stop it.
The thing that the characters care about is that he was planning on destroying the Ember Blade, not the casualties. But once the Ember Blade
Right.
is secure, there are a couple moments where they're like, maybe it's not so awesome what he
Yeah.
did, but at the same time, rah, rah, rah.
Right.
And I liked that ambiguity.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really clear because they always refer to it's the prince
Mm-hmm.
as a proper noun, but it's always hail to the emperor.
Yeah.
So we don't actually know if is he the most powerful noble?
No.
It doesn't seem like it. I think that at a castle in the homeland somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna get these scenes where the real baddie.
Yeah, because I think they said that they were going to give
He's
him
the heir. The prince is the heir apparent
and they were going to give him the Ember Blade, and he was going to be commander of Ossia.
of Ossie.
Right.
So it wouldn't be like, snapping up Hitler and so on and so forth. It would be like,
It'd be like Goebbels.
yeah,
And,
Goebbels and a bunch of other second-rate
Yeah.
lackeys. And so, in that vein, I think we would classify this as a character flaw on the part of Garrick,
Yeah.
and probably not something that was valorous.
But I think it's a certainly understandable position if you know the if you look at what he went through over the last 30 years.
Right.
You
And
know?
I really enjoyed the way that he wrote that scene.
Mm-hmm.
Where he goes in, he tries to stab the prince, but the prince is just like, oh! And just
Yeah.
like goes under the table and crawls around.
Yeah.
And then he gets into a sword fight with the general,
Mm-hmm.
so on and so forth. Yeah, pretty cool. Pretty cool
Yeah.
scene. All right. So I guess our next bullet point is the violence.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, this wasn't a terribly graphic book that I can.
Well, I mean, he does. I mean, he stabs the general through the face, and the teeth are popping out, and
Oh yeah.
there are a few descriptions of some gore here and there, and it's a violent book in the sense that there's lots of combat,
Right.
but a lot of it is what I call like the Power Rangers violence, where like the the guards and the so on and so forth, they're basically like the putties.
Yeah.
They just kind of get beat up. They're nameless, feckless, just cannon fodder
Right.
for our 16-year-old boy that has. I mean, he's killing them throughout the text, and my understanding is that he never actually even trained with a sword. It was like practice
Right.
weapons and whatever, and
Which I mean, it's implied that he learned how to use a sword, even if he never actually held a real sword before, which is certainly plausible with the wealth and influence his father's uh, shown to have.
yeah,
But I did think that there was a little bit of hinkiness in the idea there, where he kind of has his growing up moment, or wherever it was like, but Aaron was blooded, and that was all the difference between him and the guard. The idea that he'd already killed someone, and so and like that just flipped a switch, and he was suddenly like not a master swordsman, but a competent warrior. And while yes, killing someone that is, from what I understand, having not having killed anyone in my life, it is a big step. That once you've done it, sometimes it gets easier to do. It was kind of implied that killing him was like it matured him, it leveled him up, it made him a man.
yeah. It wasn't that well executed though, because the first one, it's very much he's kind of with the
Yeah,
waving the sword around, and the guy like just runs onto it, and and
yeah,
again, it's unfortunately you there's basically the named characters of the Crodons. They can sword fight, and the Dread Knights are very dangerous.
hmm,
But then everybody else is literally at the very edge of just running into a sword.
yeah.
That's their level of skill.
Well, and this also has the problem a lot of fantasy stories where only the named characters have any agency whatsoever. I mean, I don't know if that's really a specific criticism of this book, but no one really does
It
any.
doesn't take any points from Chris Wooding
Right,
because the convention is so ingrained.
right.
But also, like, it is true that it stops the story from it does. This would be a way that it could have been improved if he had challenged that norm.
Yeah, because it seemed like no one, and I think this is kind of what led my impression that this was a hopeless story, is that none of the Ossians really seemed interested in fighting the Crodons anymore. That kind of seemed like you pointed out, Keel's wife is supposed to be like the representative normie, and her whole point is, well, with the Crodons, we've got roads and we've got doctors and we've got all this stuff, and like, okay,
Yeah, just come live at home and go work for your brother on his farm.
yeah. The implication I got from that was that the issue was less doing that would have put him under the Croden thumb, and more. I got the impression that Keel would not have been happy in Rackin Bay,
No,
even if the Crodons had never set foot in Ossia.
no. And the brother wanted his wife.
Yeah,
I mean, he says to him like, "She doesn't love you.
yeah,
You'll never have her," etc.
right.
And
I do hope we get a scene. I hope we check back in with her, because, like, yeah, he sent that letter and that would kind of set her up, but I wouldn't trust the Crodons to honor that given what happened, like, immediately after he got that. I think the Crodons would look at that and be like, so you didn't hear about Onaho, or whatever it was called.
well, but what about Keel betraying his friend, leaving his wife, and then he just goes ahead and hangs himself?
It's unclear to me how much of the void inside of him was pre-existing and how much of it was a result of him facing down the beast.
Right, having gazed in the eye of Cthulhu.
Right. Because that was the impression to me, was that he and I think this is a very real depiction of someone in a situation like that. He'd alienated everyone who gave a single shit about him. He didn't really see a way forward. He might have been able to work something out. He might have been able to fix things, but he didn't see one, so he just took the easy way out.
Yeah, well, and I mean, he got killed in Skavenka.
Right.
We just don't see it take place until later.
Right.
But as you say, like, yeah, I could see how that would happen, but the order of events is strange because he knew that by betraying Garrick that he was alienating his last friend.
Right.
It wasn't as though like all of this stuff happened out of his control and then he was sad about it. Like it seemed like it happened too fast.
Yeah.
He like, why not just not betray Garrick then and go hang yourself? In that case,
Right.
it made it like, why did he betray Garrick then?
Because it gave him a way to save his son.
How?
The agreement with the Crodons. Part of the agreement was like it wasn't just money, it was
Okay.
and a cure for my son.
Okay, so you think that was in his mind, it was, I've got nothing left to live for. I save my wife and kid, then I go.
Yeah, that's why I disagree that he's a capital B bad guy.
Okay, I'll budge on that.
I mean, he's not a good guy, but
Right.
I think that's why I disagree that this is a classic high fantasy with capital B bad and capital G good guys, because Garrick is not a good guy, but Garrick is not a hero, but he's a good guy. Keel is not a villain.
When I say good guys and bad guys, I mean there's really only two options. If the Crodons win, the world is bad. If the good guys win, the world is good.
Right. Okay.
Even if there are individual characters that have gradations of morality.
Okay.
He gets an A+ for the gradations of morality, but it's not as though there's never a point in the story where you're really going, well, are the Crodons, would it be so bad if they just took over everything? That never happens. I mean,
No.
The closest we get is an individual where we see, okay, they have wives and kids too, and so on and so forth. But that's at the individual level. As a monolith, the Ossians are the good guys, the land-loving, rightful heirs and people that should be ruling their own destiny. And the Crodons are the evil Black Empire that employs, demonous dread knights.
I've been trying to figure out what the Ossian. The Crodons are Normans. The Ossians are the Saxons, Britons.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah,
I would accept that.
Like, and it just hit me that, yeah, because the Normans came over, they conquered the Britons, and they did a lot to remove the pagan influences of the Britons, and they brought them, quote unquote, civilization.
Yes. And that was the function of the scene, where we see the Crodon and his family. Yes, we get some striations of intrigue about their culture, but really the point of that scene is for the wife to make the comment that this place is like 10 years behind, and there's no culture here, and there's nothing. This is a wasteland of backwoods tribalist culture.
There's no high society here.
No, yeah. There's no grand old opry.
Yeah, there's no ball or gala.
So, on your knees, wet your lips, open up wide. Let's blow off. Let's fucking glaze this author for Grub. Let's talk about fucking Grub.
Grub the skull. Grub the...
The absolute goat.
The absolute goat. Just... I was like, there's no way he's actually going to run off with the Ember Blade. So when he came back, I wasn't super surprised. I did love that he used the Ember Blade to stop the Crusher.
Yes.
Mudsmug said it was indestructible. And yes, to contrast with our last audiobook, just to kind of, before we move into continuing glazing Grub, the narrator of this book was fantastic.
Yeah, just in the little segments that I heard you pull up when you were trying to look for a quotation, it sounded like a really well done audiobook.
Yeah. And he he gave Grubb this like Scandinavian accent, which definitely, in addition to the way the author wrote his dialogue, which was a lot of no pronouns.
Few pronouns and third person self referentials.
Right.
And kind of broken English like second language.
Yeah. Uh, it really worked. Grubb was just a fantastic character, and the narrator just really did him very well.
I think I would put him in the top like 3 just best fantasy characters I've ever encountered.
Yeah.
But if the metric is like actually is the character funny, it's not even close.
No.
I've never encountered a funnier character in a high fantasy novel before.
Right.
But I mean, he's up there with from the Dragonlance series. There's Tasselhoff Berfoot. I was a huge fan of Michael Moorcock's work, so Elric of Melniboné. There's Corwin from the Amber Chronicles, but he's up there in that echelon. But I mean, the shit that Grubb says is just hilarious, and the timing.
Yes.
And he just talks shit to everybody, and like we know he's a liar, but he just does it. It's so brazen. Like they go through Scavaland or Scavengard. What is it called?
It's Scavengard.
Scavengard. And it's this whole thing where they finally manage to battle this demon back, mostly due to the druid. But then, I don't know, 50 pages later or whatever, Grubb's talking to somebody else, and he's just like the time Grubb defeated the demon of Scavengard, and let's go to the quotes.
Yeah.
Because he just and he nicknames everybody.
Yes.
But he is this big, ugly, nasty smelling brute, but all he ever does is make fun of other people for their physical appearance. You not keep things from Grubb, eh? Grubb great warrior. Grubb wiped better than you off his arse.
Yes.
Yeah. Grubb not that way, he protested. Grubb want to help excessively angry man. Grubb shook his head. Not yet. Grubb has much to do still. Escaping camp not enough. Outwitting dread knights not enough. Even when Grubb defeated Beast of Scavengard, it not enough.
Which I thought that was interesting because his whole thing is that he stole someone else's skin and had a disgraced tattooist tattoo their story on his skin. And that is a cardinal sin in their culture. Just completely beyond the pale. He's excised, completely banished. But it sounds like he can go back there and say that he defeated the beast, and that's not a lie to them.
Right. He could get that tattooed.
Right.
And I'm guessing he's gonna.
Oh, he's definitely gonna.
He's definitely gonna. Once there was, and so this is where I don't know. He's bantering with one of the other characters. Once there was a man with no chin. He had a stupid haircut. He heard song and went duh duh duh. Bullhead better go that way. The Scarl chuckled at his own wit, ignoring the appalled stares of his companions, and climbed to his feet. Grubb done here. Grubb going to take enormous brown dump in woods. You should come, tonsils. They tell tales of this one for centuries.
I think that was when Herod said that he had basically abandoned his entire
race,
his entire life to follow this bard. Like a deadhead.
And so so Grubb makes fun of him and then says, "I'm gonna go take a shit. Hey bitch, you want to come see me take this dump?"
And I couldn't quite catch it. He calls him tonsils. And the way Herod reacted the first time he called it was like, that was some grievous nickname. But I don't know if it was something I missed in the text.
Yeah. Well, and then later he says, Grubb cackled, "Ha, Bullhead got his mouth shut by Mudslug. Maybe your sweetheart write a song about that." And then, I could go on with the quotes. I have a lot of them, but I think that's enough for these purposes.
Yeah.
But then he also is always stealing shit.
He's always stealing shit and he's always eating.
Yes. And he kills the keymaster.
Yes.
And then eats his dinner.
And then when they meet up with him, What's that on your face? Is that roast beef? You've been eating.
Yeah. Is that the voice that he uses?
Yeah.
Well, and I think a lesser author that would have been the character.
Right.
But then also, I mean, Grubb will just do like straight up gratuitous violence.
Yeah.
We're talking like the prison style hug and shank over and over.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he
Tackle someone from the upper deck and then just continually shiv them. Yeah.
he just keeps stabbing them until their body stops moving.
Right.
And he just doesn't have an issue with that at all. And he's just a really complex, interesting character, fantastic backstory. I can't think of anything wrong with that character. It's literally a near perfect. It's just a god shot. Thank you, Chris Wooding. You know what I mean? Fucking blow it in my mouth.
Just give us all books about Grubb.
Oh, the story of just Grubb only.
Yeah. And I did really like the scene where Aaron or Cade said something to the effect of Scarls can't lie, and both Keel and Garrick start laughing because they're like, who told you that?
A Scarl.
A Scarl. Because Scarl can lie, can't lie to each other. They can lie to any non-Scarl all they want.
Yeah, and you get that they become friends, particularly Grubb and Aaron, by the end of the story, and he begrudgingly he's not going to steal the Ember Blade because he even says like I can't. He uses Grubb speak, but he essentially says like I've come to the conclusion that like I can't achieve heroism to my people by stealing something.
Right.
I have to do something. But then he's literally like I'm gonna be the one that's the hero of your story.
Right.
They're gonna sing songs about me.
Yeah.
And there's that scene where they're in I can't remember the town's name, but Grubb has gone off and pickpocketed most of the people in the market, and he's stolen smokes and a flask and whatever, and he's sitting with Aaron, or pardon me, with Cade.
Yeah.
And he gives him a smoke, gives him a flask, and Cade takes a drink. It's like, oh, what the fuck is that? And Grubb's like, whatever was in it when I stole it.
Yeah.
And yeah, just every time the character opens his mouth, there were one or two lines at the very end of the book that were a little bit too jarring, given the because he writes a banger of a tearjerker at the very end.
Yes.
But 99.9% of everything Grubb says is legitimately funny.
Yeah.
Glazing complete.
Yeah.
So I guess, the ending, I was genuinely surprised that they killed off the bard. We keep forgetting her name.
Orica?
Is that what it is? Yes, Orica. And then, I mean, the scene where they bury her, and then she had given Herod the piece of paper with her song on it. Then he starts to sing the song. Then the group sings the song. That was as powerful as any scene I've read, and regardless of fantasy, just in literature like that. That was the skill of being able to emote and to draw the reader into a difficult emotional moment. That you can obviously tell that Chris Wooding has a mature and I'll even say just a virtuosic mastery of that skill set.
Yeah, and that song felt like a medieval ballad.
Yes.
It didn't have the verse chorus structure that we get in a modern song. It was just a story, but it still kind of repeated themes and stuff. It was very excellent song.
Yeah, I think the tendency in the genre would have been for it to be a sea shanty.
Yeah.
In form. And this was not. This was a sort of like the Month of Maying or any of your other Elizabethan ballads.
Right.
I guess, although I can't remember for sure if a ballad might have a chorus. But right. in this case it didn't. And that's basically where the story ends. He ends it on that really sour, difficult note.
I'd call it bittersweet because there's definitely a little bit of, and now the revolution begins, which is a little bit hopeful and triumphant, but also like, now the real work
The real
begins.
work begins, and you're happy for the characters that survived,
But
but sad
yeah,
at the loss. And I will admit, I was very glad that he didn't kill the dog.
yeah, when they were about to kill the
I was
dog, I was
like,
like, if he kills the dog,
bro,
I'm throwing this book.
yeah, I can't handle it.
No,
Uh,
especially if the dog was fucking awesome.
the dog was as far as familiars go, extremely well written.
Yeah,
Very good. And
I think he threaded the needle of making a dog who was a character without it not being a dog, if that
yes,
makes sense.
yes,
Like,
because you get the soft, again, the soft magic system, so you get the vague impression that it's not a normal dog.
no,
There's some sentience there that goes beyond even just the. Cause I'm a pretty firm believer in. I don't think we have it right in terms of what animals can think and feel,
right.
but beyond that, there's a human sentience there, but also there's a specific connection between Ruck and what's the druid's name?
Vika.
Vika, that transcends that as
Mm-hmm.
well. But it's very light.
Yeah.
He doesn't lean into it very far, and so you're just left to wonder.
Right. It's just a couple of points where the dog, behaves a little more intelligently than you would expect a dog to typically act.
Yes.
But otherwise, it's just, and especially the scene where Vika is checking out Tad, and the dog comes over and puts his head on Tad's lap, and Tad is immediately, basically immediately calmed by the dog.
Yeah.
Like, that's just a dog thing.
Right.
Like, there's no special power. That's just a fucking dog thing.
Yep. It's just being a dog.
Yeah.
All right. Well, final thoughts.
Do we want to talk more about Mara, or did we?
Yeah. I mean, we can jump into. We can talk about. I don't know if we specifically talked about her.
No, I mean, we mentioned how she was, when we talked about gender, how she was this inventor who invented banging prosthesis.
Yep.
I mean, by all accounts, it seems to functionally entirely replace the limb that was lost. Who is living in this incredibly, patriarchal world, and is doing her best to undercut that she can.
Yeah, she is a potent like system underminer,
Right.
a subversive force.
Absolutely.
I will say I think she is the most likely character to go bad
Mm-hmm.
in the subsequent book.
Yeah.
If her views on the way things should go or her self-preservation instinct come at odds with the needs and goals of the group, then I
Yeah.
do suspicion that that's why she was left alive and Orica killed.
That said, I don't see her siding with the Crotons.
No, I think it would be she would abandon the group or she
Yeah.
would sell them out for her own personal gain or something like that. I
Right.
could see that happening. She is not.
She doesn't seem ideologically committed to Aussian freedom. She's more of a single issue feminist.
Yes.
So that
And I
could be
mean
interesting.
her feminism could come at odds with the group. Particularly again as we said like it does seem because there's this moment where they're in the vault having just stolen the weapon
Mm-hmm.
and Orica picks it up. And I thought, "Oh, fucking do it to me, Chris."
Yes.
But then he doesn't.
Yeah.
And she just like, "Here, it's your sword, white man."
Yep.
And that was I was disappointed there. I was like, "Oh yeah, fucking virtuoso warrior bard, I'm in."
Hell yeah.
And it could have been a whole thing where the druid was like, "Oh, I didn't realize that the champion was because it was bathed in light when she had seen the vision."
Yeah, I knew right away that it wasn't Garrick, it was Aaron that she saw in that vision,
That
right?
part was pretty obvious,
Yeah.
and also the fact that Garrick is like a 50 mid 50s
Mm-hmm.
character, which I don't want to be ageist about it, but he's not he's not like a Mithrandir
Right.
or what's the race that Aragorn is.
Oh, Numenor.
Numenor.
Yeah,
Numenorian.
something like that.
He's not like a long-lived human variant or anything like that. He's just like a guy approaching retirement age.
Right.
That if he was in his 40s, I wouldn't even mention it. But it seemed kind of specific.
Yeah.
That they were that Chris Wooding was setting that up. So it was pretty obvious that the champion of the revolution going forward is probably going to be this coming of age main character and not the aging side character.
Right.
So to speak. But for a moment there, I did think he was going to do something amazing.
Really cool, yeah.
And I would have enjoyed seeing her put down the loot and pick up the Ember Blade and fight alongside Herod.
Well, especially since she had to leave the loot behind when she fled the performance.
Yes.
So, yeah.
She had to leave the loot behind, and, she belongs to the actual group who's being genocided, not just occupied.
Right.
And, yeah, that would have been fucking good.
Yeah.
You
I do think there is something that, like, if you read this book and don't consider the implications of what they say about the sod, that the group that is the most explicitly put upon on the page are the collaborating white people.
Yes, the silent Germans.
Right.
And there's a few scenes where Garrick he just lays it out, and he's like, we need to start finding collaborators and killing their kids and their families.
Yeah.
And that's pretty dark. He has a very pessimistic view based on what he's experienced. But I will say one norm in fantasy that, and this is in a lot of literature and TV and whatever, is that the good guys are not willing to do any of the bad stuff that the bad guys do, even if it's obvious to the audience that if they just did a bad thing, it would actually end up turning the world around. And the good guys essentially say, well, no, because then we're no better than they are. And they don't do it. I'm hoping that he's not gonna. He seems as an author willing to explore what it's like when the good guys, with scare quotes, are willing,
right,
at least in part, to utilize the tactics of the bad guys,
right,
for the end of destroying the apparatus of power.
It definitely seems like he's trying to avoid that trope of the hero who mows down faceless minions by the dozen and then gets to the boss and is like, no, killing you would only make me the same as you.
Right.
And it's like, but you just killed 1,000 people who had done much, much less bad things than this guy did.
Well, and I think it was Hart who does point it out. He's like, I haven't killed like 1/10 of what you just killed. Like you're killing now.
Yeah.
You're doing it now. And again, I liked that tension, that moral tension that was created there, even though, it really wasn't any of our actual main cast. Like that was Garrick's folly.
Right.
And it's really, the way it's written is, I don't think the author is intending us to valorize Garrick's deeds at the end, even though it kind of is such that he sets the bomb off in order to save himself. Like it's mostly to kill the Dread Knight, and just sort of like a happy coincidence that also he gets to half accomplish his master plan.
Right.
All right, now.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to throw in?
If you ignored all our previous warnings and gotten to this point of the show and haven't read the book, sorry for spoiling it, but there's a lot more good in this, so go read this book.
Yep, fantastic book. Better than Knight Errant.
I want... Oh, leagues above Knight Errant. The only reason why I would put Deathmaker a quarter notch above this is that it was shorter. And I feel this definitely dragged in places, but can the internet do its thing and make Chris Wooding just swap him and Brandon Sanderson? Because I would like to read more of this guy's work, and I don't want to read another word written by Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah, and I think one problem with that is Sanderson, good or bad, that motherfucker pumps novels out.
That motherfucker is a machine. I will
And
give him that.
this guy is not.
No.
He's got like 2 years of Sanderson's output for 20 of his.
Right.
His whole catalog is by length too. I would imagine without hyperbole, let's say probably 5 years. He's probably only a quarter as productive, and I think that hurts him in terms of being able to mount that precipice and maintain it there. But I enjoyed this infinitely more than I enjoyed Way of Kings, and I would say a lot more than I enjoyed Mistborn. Because as we've said a few times, I thought Mistborn was a perfectly fine novel.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. I just didn't. Way of Kings for me was just a dud.
Yeah.
So I guess that's our new thing, is that we have to shit on poor Brandon Sanderson once an episode.
You know what? We're riding the cosmic scales here.
Oh, definitely.
If you watch the number of times I've heard someone as a shorthand for giving me a good book as, if you told me this was like a Brandon Sanderson book, I just, what are we missing? Like, we're two reasonably intelligent people.
Yeah, fight us.
Tell us what's so great about Brandon Sanderson that he's the pinnacle of what a fantasy author should be according to many people, and we just don't see it.
Yeah, if you're somebody that produces content of your own, or you write book reviews, or anything like that,
or point us to someone who has made that video essay or what have you.
We would love to have somebody come into the Staff and Trench Coat, and we could have a backroom brawl on this issue for sure. All right, so next time we will be reading John Dies at the End by David Wong, which this is your pick again. Yes. And
so this is another one in my people I listen to on a podcast wrote a book, so I want to read their book. Although in this case, it's more like someone wrote a book and then got into podcasting, because it's actually written by, the author's actual name is Jason Pargin. And he wrote this 15 years ago as like a one chapter at a time on his blog.
Oh, okay.
And he's written other books in this universe since, and he's one of the people who worked at crack.com and came out of that as an author, podcaster type person, who also is really cool, like politically, ideologically, that kind of thing.
And is this like an urban fantasy, or?
My understanding, yeah, it's a sort of a I think he's described it as like a more of a psychedelic thriller.
Okay, so a little bit outside of what we normally do then.
Right, but he's got a kind of dry sense of humor that I think we'll both enjoy. So.
Fantastic. So yeah, next time, John Dies at the End by David Wong, and as always, I am Raymond Magdalen, and for Pope Jupiter, we hope to see you in the next episode. Hey, thanks for listening. You can follow us on Twitter at Staff Trenchcoat. Look for us on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Feel free to shoot us an email at staffandtrenchcoat@gmail.com if you have a book recommendation, and we hope to see you in the next episode.